How would you feel if the very person judging you didn't know you held their fate in your hands? Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I can't cash this check. It's against our policy to process suspicious transactions. The man's voice rang loud and firm, the condescension dripping from his words. People in the bank lobby began to glance over, curious about the commotion. The woman, dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, with confidence radiating off her, stayed calm. She met the manager's cold stare with one of quiet strength. Suspicious? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, the manager replied. His name tag read Bradley Owens, and his polished suit screamed privilege. You'll need to verify where this check came from. It's far too large for someone without proper documentation. The room grew tense. Whispers buzzed among the patrons. The woman's eyes narrowed as she leaned forward, her voice steady but sharp. Mr. Owens, she said, her tone commanding respect. Do you know who I am? The question threw Bradley off for a second, but he recovered quickly, his dismissive smirk intact. It doesn't matter who you are. You don't have the credentials to back this up. I've seen plenty of people try to. Enough, she interrupted, raising her hand. You've made a mistake, Mr. Owens. A very big one. Bradley crossed his arms, unimpressed. What kind of mistake? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out her ID badge. The moment he read it, his face drained of color. President of Regional Operations, Sovereign Bank. The silence in the bank lobby was deafening. Bradley stammered. I had no idea. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of every injustice she'd endured. I'd like to see you try to explain this to corporate. Better yet, to me in the boardroom. Shall we? Bradley's mouth hung open as she motioned for him to follow her to his office. Earlier that morning, Angela Matthews had entered the branch with no intention of causing a stir. She was running late for a meeting and had decided to stop by the bank in person to deposit a check from a client. A substantial one, granted, but nothing unusual for someone in her position. Angela was no stranger to prejudice. A successful black woman in corporate America, she had fought for every inch of her success. People often underestimated her, and sadly, she'd come to expect it. But today felt different. The blatant disrespect Bradley had shown wasn't just unprofessional, it was personal. Angela's morning had started smoothly. She'd woken up early, energized from a productive weekend, and reviewed the agenda for her upcoming leadership meeting. By 9 a.m., she was out the door, her tailored suit and polished heels a testament to her hard-earned success. When she walked into the bank, she noticed the staff immediately stiffen. Bradley, who was standing near the customer service desk, glanced her way and walked over with the confidence of someone who thought he knew exactly who he was dealing with. Good morning, how can I help you? He asked, his smile thin and insincere. Angela handed him the check and her ID. I'd like to deposit this into my account. Bradley took the check, glanced at the amount, and froze. His eyes darted between Angela and the piece of paper in his hand. Excuse me for a moment, he said, walking briskly to his desk. Angela watched as he whispered something to a teller, who glanced at her and frowned. Moments later, Bradley returned, his expression colder than before. I'm afraid we can't process this check, he said bluntly. Angela frowned. Why not? Bradley shifted uncomfortably, but maintained his composure. There are procedures we have to follow for transactions of this size, especially when they appear unusual. Unusual? Angela repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. Yes, he replied, standing a little straighter. We need proof of where the funds originated. Angela felt her patience thinning. She had dealt with this kind of prejudice before, too many times to count. Mr. Owens, this check is from one of our corporate accounts. If you'd taken a moment to verify it, you'd know that. Bradley shook his head. I'm sorry, but we can't take chances. Angela could feel the stares of the other customers on her. Embarrassment mixed with frustration, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she calmly asked, Is there someone else I can speak to? Bradley smirked. I'm the branch manager. You're already speaking to the highest authority here. For a moment, Angela considered walking away, but then she remembered the countless others who might face the same treatment. No, she thought. Today, she wasn't going to let this slide. Very well, she said, reaching into her bag. Let's see if corporate agrees with your assessment. The second Angela revealed her badge, Bradley's confident demeanor crumbled. And just like that, the tables turned. Bradley followed Angela into his office, his nerves visible in his shaky hands. The once smug manager now looked like a child caught in a lie. Angela didn't say a word as she took a seat, waiting for him to speak. I didn't realize who you were, Bradley stammered. Angela raised an eyebrow. Does it matter who I am? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Before Bradley could respond, Angela's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled. Excuse me, she said, answering the call. Yes, I'm at the branch now. Let's proceed as discussed. Bradley watched, his confusion growing by the second. Angela ended the call and turned her attention back to him. Mr. Owens, I hope you're ready to explain yourself. This isn't just about me anymore. The knock at the office door interrupted them, and when Bradley opened it, his face turned ashen. Standing at the door was a man in a sharp gray suit, flanked by two other corporate executives. Bradley immediately recognized him as James Whitaker, the senior vice president of operations at Sovereign Bank. James wasn't just his superior, he was several ranks above him. Good morning, Mr. Owens, James said, his tone clipped and professional. I believe we need to have a conversation. Bradley's knees nearly buckled. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain calm. Mr. Whitaker, this is a misunderstanding. Save it, James interrupted, holding up a hand. He turned to Angela, his expression softening. Ms. Matthews, my apologies for this situation. Shall we begin? Angela nodded, her face unreadable. The two of them walked back into the office, leaving Bradley standing awkwardly in the doorway. Please close the door, Mr. Owens, Angela said firmly. The small office suddenly felt suffocating. Bradley could feel the heat of their combined scrutiny, and his mind raced for excuses. Ms. Matthews, he began, his voice shaky, I want to apologize for the inconvenience. If I had known who you were. Angela leaned forward, her eyes piercing. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Owens. You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with basic respect and professionalism. Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but James cut in. Mr. Owens, this isn't just an HR issue. This is about the integrity of our operations. How often do you make judgment calls like this? Rarely, sir, Bradley stammered. I always follow protocol, but this situation seemed unusual. Angela tilted her head. Unusual because of the amount, or because of the person handing you the check? Bradley's silence spoke volumes. The day had started as any other for Bradley Owens. He arrived at the branch early, greeted his staff, and spent the morning reviewing performance reports. The bank was quiet, and he felt good about his numbers. Around 10:30 a.m., Angela Matthews walked in. Her entrance was subtle, yet something about her presence commanded attention. Bradley had noticed her immediately. Her poised demeanor and tailored suit hinted at success, but to him, something didn't quite add up. When she handed him the check, he felt a twinge of suspicion. The amount, $150,000, was significant, and in his mind, it didn't align with her appearance. He didn't intend to profile her, or so he told himself, but as he walked to his desk to verify the check, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Instead of running the check through the system, he leaned over to one of the tellers. Does that woman look familiar to you? He whispered. The teller glanced over and shrugged. No, but what does that matter? Just verify the check. Bradley frowned. I don't know. Something doesn't feel right. Ignoring the teller's advice, he returned to Angela and decided to stall. That's when the situation spiraled. Back in the office, Angela's phone buzzed again. This time, she placed it on speaker. Angela Matthews here, she said. A crisp voice responded. Ms. Matthews, this is Claudia Reynolds, head of compliance. I've been briefed on the situation. Would you like me to proceed with the audit of this branch? Bradley's heart dropped. An audit? This couldn't be happening. Yes, Claudia, Angela replied. Please ensure every aspect of their operations is reviewed, starting with customer interaction protocols. Bradley's face turned red. An audit isn't necessary. This was a simple mistake. Angela held up her hand, silencing him. Mr. Owens, the issue here isn't just about me. It's about how you've chosen to handle your responsibilities. If this is how you treat a customer with valid credentials, I can't imagine how others have been treated. James leaned forward, his voice sharp. Mr. Owens, I suggest you stop talking and start listening. Your career might depend on it. Bradley sank into his chair, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. Meanwhile, the audit team arrived at the branch. Word spread quickly among the staff, and the atmosphere turned tense. Employees whispered nervously, wondering if their own actions would come under scrutiny. Angela stayed in the office, calmly answering emails as the audit unfolded. She wasn't one to revel in someone else's discomfort, but she also knew this was a necessary step. Change often required discomfort. By the afternoon, Bradley was escorted out of his office by James. The walk through the bank lobby felt like an eternity. Customers and employees alike stared, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright pity. As he reached the front door, Bradley glanced back at Angela. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried a quiet strength that made him look away. Hours later, as Angela prepared to leave, James stopped her. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," he said. "This isn't just about one branch. It's a wake-up call for all of us." Angela nodded. "It's not about revenge, James. It's about accountability. People deserve to be treated with dignity, no matter who they are or what they look like." As she stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, Angela felt a mix of emotions. She knew this was just one battle in a much larger war, but it was a step in the right direction. She glanced at her phone. Another meeting awaited her, but this time, she walked in knowing that her voice and her actions had made a difference. The day after the audit was conducted, the entire Sovereign Bank corporate office was buzzing. The incident at the branch had stirred up a whirlwind of attention. Emails circulated, phone calls were made, and the story had even reached social media, where customers began sharing their own experiences with subtle, and sometimes blatant, discrimination at local banks. Angela Matthews sat in her corner office, overlooking the city skyline. The sunlight glinted off the glass buildings, but her mind was focused on the reports from Claudia Reynolds, the head of compliance. "Ms. Matthews," Claudia said as she entered Angela's office, her laptop in hand, "we've completed the preliminary findings from the audit." Angela gestured for her to sit. "Go ahead. What did you uncover?" Claudia sighed. "It's worse than we thought." Bradley Owens had flagged multiple transactions as suspicious over the past 6 months, and there's a clear pattern. Most of the flagged transactions involved people of color. Angela frowned, her stomach tightening. Were any of those transactions actually fraudulent? Claudia shook her head. Not a single one. In fact, many of them were legitimate business owners, professionals, and even longtime customers of the bank. Several of them reported feeling humiliated by the way they were treated. Angela leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had expected some level of bias, but the extent of it was shocking. "And what about the staff?" Angela asked. "Did they speak up about any of this?" Claudia hesitated. "A few did. They said they felt uncomfortable with Bradley's decisions, but didn't want to risk their jobs by challenging him. It seems he had created a culture of fear and compliance." Angela's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a personal issue anymore. It was systemic. Meanwhile, Bradley Owens was at home, pacing the floor of his modest apartment. He had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, but he already knew his career at Sovereign Bank was over. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from friends, colleagues, and even a few reporters. He ignored them all, too ashamed to face the questions he knew were coming. Sitting down, Bradley opened his laptop and scrolled through the news. The incident had gone viral with headlines like, "Bank manager denies black woman's check, learns she's his boss," and "Corporate exec exposes bias in banking system." The comments under the articles were brutal. People called him everything from incompetent to outright racist. Bradley felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a boulder. He thought back to that moment in the bank. Why had he assumed the worst about Angela? Why had he let his biases cloud his judgment? The more he reflected, the more he realized this wasn't just about Angela. It was about the countless people he had wronged without even realizing it. Back at the corporate office, Angela was preparing for a meeting with the CEO, Richard Hale. As she walked into the sleek boardroom, she was greeted by Richard and several other senior executives. "Angela," Richard said, standing to shake her hand, "thank you for joining us. We've been reviewing the situation, and I want you to know we're taking this very seriously." Angela nodded. "I appreciate that, Richard. But this can't just be about one branch or one manager. We need systemic changes." The room fell silent as Angela laid out her vision. "We need mandatory bias training for all employees, starting with branch managers," she said. "We also need to create a more transparent process for flagging transactions and ensure that customers aren't being profiled based on their race or appearance." Richard leaned forward. "That's a tall order, Angela. But you're right. This isn't just about avoiding bad press. It's about doing what's right." The other executives murmured in agreement. Angela continued, her voice steady. "This is an opportunity for Sovereign Bank to set an example for the entire industry. We can't erase the harm that's been done, but we can prevent it from happening again." Later that evening, Angela sat in her living room, reflecting on the day's events. She felt a sense of accomplishment, but knew the road ahead would be long. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from Claudia. "Claudia, one of the employees at the branch wants to speak with you directly. She says she has important information about Bradley's actions." Angela's curiosity was piqued. She replied quickly, "Set up a meeting. I'll make time tomorrow." As Angela put her phone down, she couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and unease. What could this employee know that hadn't already come to light? The next morning, Angela arrived at the office early. Claudia was already there, waiting with a young woman named Lila Thompson, one of the tellers from Bradley's branch. Lila looked nervous as she stepped into Angela's office, clutching a folder. "Ms. Matthews," Lila began, her voice trembling slightly, "thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure if I should come forward, but after everything that's happened, I felt like I had to." Angela offered her a reassuring smile. "Take your time, Lila. Whatever you have to say, I'm here to listen." Lila took a deep breath and opened the folder. Inside were copies of emails and notes, all detailing Bradley's actions over the past year. "I've been keeping these records because I felt something was wrong," Lila said. Bradley would often override transactions without giving a valid reason. He also made comments about certain customers that were inappropriate. Angela scanned the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. "Did you ever report this to anyone?" she asked. Lila shook her head. "I wanted to, but I was afraid. Bradley had a way of making people feel small, like we didn't matter." Angela placed the documents on her desk and looked at Lila. "You did the right thing by coming forward. This information will be crucial as we move forward." Lila nodded, a hint of relief in her eyes. Just then, Angela's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Richard Hale. "Angela, we need you in the boardroom immediately. Something major has come up." Angela's heart skipped a beat. "What now?" Angela hurried down the polished hallway toward the boardroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Her mind raced with possibilities. Richard Hale's urgent message didn't provide any details, but the tension in the corporate office was palpable. When she pushed open the boardroom doors, she was met with a room full of grim faces. Richard Hale stood at the head of the table, flanked by the legal team and the public relations director, Marianne Foster. "Angela," Richard said, gesturing for her to sit, "we've just been hit with a major development." Angela took a seat, her gaze steady. "What's going on?" Marianne slid a printed stack of papers across the table. "This," she said, her tone heavy, "is a class action lawsuit. It's from a group of customers who claim they were discriminated against by Sovereign Bank employees. The incident at Bradley Owens branch seems to have opened the floodgates." Angela flipped through the documents, her stomach sinking. The plaintiff's stories mirrored her own experience. Denied transactions, excessive questioning, and humiliation in public. "This is exactly why I said we need systemic changes," Angela said, her voice firm. "These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a deeper problem." Richard rubbed his temples. "I understand that, Angela. But this lawsuit could cost the bank millions. Our reputation is already in tatters, and the media isn't letting up." Marianne interjected, "We need a strategy. Fast. Damage control is our priority right now." Angela leaned forward, her voice steady but passionate. Damage control won't fix this, Richard. We can't sweep this under the rug and hope it goes away. If we want to rebuild trust, we have to take accountability and show the public that we're committed to change. Richard nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. What do you propose? Angela took a deep breath. First, we need to issue a public apology. Not just a generic statement, but one that acknowledges our failures and outlines the steps we're taking to correct them. Second, we need to accelerate the bias training for all employees. And third, we need to set up a task force to investigate and address these claims head-on. The room fell silent as Angela's words hung in the air. Finally, Richard spoke. It's risky, but you're right. Let's draft the apology immediately. Marianne, work with Angela on the statement. And Angela, I want you to lead the task force. Angela nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility. Consider it done. Back at her office, Angela began drafting the apology. The words came easily. She knew exactly what needed to be said. To our customers and the community, we at Sovereign Bank deeply regret the incidents of bias and discrimination that have come to light. These actions are unacceptable and do not reflect the values we strive to uphold. We acknowledge that we have failed to meet the standards of fairness and respect that our customers deserve, and we are committed to making things right. As she worked, Claudia entered with an update. Angela, I thought you should know, Bradley Owens has hired a lawyer. He's claiming wrongful termination and is threatening to countersue the bank. Angela set her pen down, her brow furrowing. On what grounds? Claudia smirked humorlessly. He says he was following bank protocol and that he's being scapegoated for a systemic issue. Angela leaned back in her chair, processing the information. He's not entirely wrong about the systemic issue, she admitted. But that doesn't excuse his actions. Claudia nodded. What's our next move? Angela's expression hardened. We let the legal team handle his countersuit. Meanwhile, we focus on cleaning up this mess, starting with the changes we've outlined. The next day, Angela visited the branch where it all began. The staff looked nervous as she entered, but Angela greeted them warmly, determined to set a positive tone. She held a meeting with the employees, listening to their concerns and sharing her vision for the future. I know this has been a difficult time, she said, but I want you to know that change is coming. Together, we can rebuild trust with our customers and create a better environment for everyone. Afterward, Angela spoke privately with Lila Thompson. Lila, Angela said, I want to thank you again for coming forward. Your courage has made a real difference. Lila smiled shyly. It's just, I've seen too many people treated unfairly. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Angela placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. You've done the right thing, and I promise, your voice will be heard. As Angela left the branch, she received a call from Richard. Angela, he said, his tone urgent. We've got another issue. Someone leaked internal emails to the press. They're claiming we've known about these problems for years and chose to ignore them. Angela stopped in her tracks. Do we know who leaked them? Not yet, Richard replied, but the media is all over it. They're calling for heads to roll. Mine, yours, everyone's. Angela felt a surge of frustration. It seemed like every step forward was met with another setback. But she knew giving up wasn't an option. Richard, she said firmly, let me handle this. I'll address the media directly. You're sure about that? Richard asked. I'm sure, Angela replied. This is bigger than any one of us. It's time to face the music. That evening, Angela stood in front of a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing in her face. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Good evening. My name is Angela Matthews, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer at Sovereign Bank. I stand before you today not to defend our mistakes, but to take responsibility for them. Her voice was steady, her words heartfelt. As she outlined the bank's failures and its plans for reform, she saw the skepticism in the reporter's eyes begin to fade. But just as she finished her statement, a reporter shouted from the back, Ms. Matthews, what about the leaked emails? Do you deny that Sovereign Bank knew about these issues for years? Angela paused, the tension in the air thick. She knew this was a pivotal moment. I don't deny it, she said finally, but I can promise you this. Those days are over. We can't change the past, but we can build a better future. And that's exactly what we intend to do. The room erupted in questions, but Angela held her ground, answering each one with honesty and grace. As the press conference ended, Angela felt a sense of resolve. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was ready for the fight. The next morning, Angela arrived at Sovereign Bank's corporate headquarters to a flurry of activity. The press conference had been widely covered, and reactions were pouring in. While some praised her candor and commitment to change, others were skeptical. The leaked emails had stirred a hornet's nest, and Angela knew the fallout was far from over. She had just settled into her office when Claudia knocked on the door, holding a tablet. "Angela, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight. Angela took the tablet and scanned the headline on the news site. Sovereign Bank, a culture of cover UPS? Whistleblower alleges decades of discrimination. Her heart sank as she read further. The article quoted an anonymous former employee who claimed that upper management had routinely ignored reports of discriminatory practices. "This keeps getting worse," Angela muttered, setting the tablet down. Claudia nodded. "The board is meeting in an hour to discuss the situation. Richard wants you there." In the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. The directors exchanged worried glances as Richard Hale began the meeting. "We're in a crisis, folks," he said bluntly. "The allegations in this article are damaging, and if more whistleblowers come forward, we could be looking at a federal investigation." One of the board members, a stern-faced woman named Judith Reynolds, spoke up. "Angela, you've been vocal about systemic changes, but this makes it look like we've been dragging our feet. How do you propose we address this?" Angela straightened in her chair. "We need to bring in an independent auditing firm to review our practices and policies. If we're serious about change, we have to be transparent, even if it means exposing more issues." Another board member, Robert Langston, frowned. "And if that leads to more lawsuits? We could lose everything." Angela met his gaze evenly. "If we don't take this step, we've already lost. Accountability is the only way forward." After a long silence, Richard nodded. "Angela's right. Let's vote on hiring an independent auditor." The motion passed, though not without reluctance from some members. As Angela left the meeting, her phone buzzed with a message from Lila Thompson. "Ms. Matthews, I think you should know. Some customers at the branch are organizing a protest. They're demanding justice." Angela felt a pang of concern. While she supported their right to protest, a public demonstration could escalate tensions further. She quickly dialed Lila's number. "Lila, can you connect me with the organizers? I'd like to meet with them before things get out of hand." That evening, Angela met with a small group of customers outside the branch. Their leader, a middle-aged woman named Teresa Brooks, spoke passionately about her experiences with the bank. "We're tired of being treated like second-class citizens," Teresa said, her voice shaking with emotion. "It's not just about what happened to you. It's about all of us." Angela listened intently, nodding in agreement. "You're absolutely right, Teresa. And I promise you, we're taking steps to address these issues. But I need your help. Let's work together to push for change, not just here but across the industry." Teresa seemed hesitant at first, but Angela's sincerity won her over. "All right," she said finally. "We'll give you a chance to prove you're serious." Back at her office, Angela felt a glimmer of hope. The meeting with the protesters had been tense but productive, and she believed they could become allies in her fight for change. But just as she began to relax, Claudia burst into the office, looking panicked. "Angela, you're not going to believe this," she said, holding up her phone. Angela stared at the screen, her stomach dropping. A new video was trending online. Footage from a security camera showing Bradley Owens denying her check at the branch. The caption read, "Sovereign Bank's shame. Chief Diversity Officer humiliated by her own employee." Angela sank into her chair, her mind racing. The video was damning, and its release threatened to derail everything she was working toward. "Who leaked this?" Angela asked, her voice tight. "We don't know yet," Claudia replied, "but the media is all over it. They're calling for Bradley to be arrested and for more heads to roll." Angela closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had to act quickly. The next day, Angela held an emergency press conference to address the video. Cameras flashed as she stepped up to the podium, her expression resolute. "I won't sugarcoat this," she began. "What you've seen in that video is unacceptable. It's a painful reminder of the work we still have to do, not just as a company, but as a society. But let me be clear. Sovereign Bank is committed to change, and we will not rest until we've earned back the trust of our customers and our community." The questions came fast and furious, but Angela remained composed, deflecting the worst of the criticism. As the conference ended, Angela returned to her office, exhausted but determined. The video's release had been a major blow, but she refused to let it derail her mission. But just as she began to feel a sliver of hope, Richard Hale called with another bombshell. "Angela," he said gravely, "we've got a bigger problem. The audit has uncovered evidence of financial misconduct, embezzlement, falsified records, and more. And some of it leads back to Bradley's branch." Angela's breath caught. This wasn't just about discrimination anymore. The corruption ran deeper than she had imagined. Angela gripped her phone tightly as Richard's words echoed in her mind. Financial misconduct? Embezzlement? This was no longer just a battle against discrimination. It was a fight for the bank's survival. "Richard," Angela said, her voice steady despite the storm swirling in her head. "How bad is it?" "We're still digging through the records," Richard replied. "But it looks like this has been going on for years. And it's not limited to Bradley Owens. There are signs that other branches might be involved." Angela felt a chill run down her spine. Sovereign Bank wasn't just facing a PR nightmare. They were teetering on the edge of a full-blown scandal. "Send me everything you have," Angela said firmly. "I'll start reviewing the data tonight." Hours later, Angela sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of documents and spreadsheets. The evidence was damning. Large sums of money had been siphoned off through falsified accounts, with most of the activity tied to Bradley's branch. But what struck Angela the most was how carefully it had been hidden. Whoever was behind this wasn't just stealing. They were manipulating the system to cover their tracks. Claudia walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you could use this," she said, setting one down on Angela's desk. Angela offered a tired smile. "Thanks, Claudia. I've been going through the records, and it's worse than we thought. This isn't just incompetence. It's deliberate fraud." Claudia's brow furrowed. "Do you think Bradley was the mastermind?" Angela shook her head. "I don't know. He might have been involved, but this feels bigger than him. I need to figure out who else had access to these accounts." Claudia hesitated before speaking. "Angela, if this gets out, it could destroy the bank. Are you sure we're ready for that?" Angela met her gaze, her expression resolute. "We can't keep this under wraps, Claudia. The truth will come out sooner or later, and when it does, we need to show that we handled it the right way." The next morning, Angela presented her findings to Richard and the board. The room was silent as she outlined the extent of the fraud and its potential implications. "This is catastrophic," Judith Reynolds said, her voice shaking. "If the authorities get wind of this, we could face criminal charges." Richard sighed heavily. "We have no choice. We need to bring in federal investigators. Trying to handle this internally would only make us look complicit." Angela nodded. "I agree. But we also need to take immediate action to reassure our customers. That means freezing the affected accounts, reaching out to impacted clients, and issuing a statement about the steps we're taking." The board reluctantly agreed, though the tension in the room was palpable. Later that day, Angela received a call from Teresa Brooks, the protest leader she'd met with earlier. "Angela," Teresa said, her tone cautious, "I've been hearing rumors about embezzlement at the bank. Is it true?" Angela hesitated, knowing how delicate the situation was. "Teresa, I can't discuss the specifics right now, but I promise you, we're taking this very seriously. Our priority is making things right, for everyone." Teresa sighed. "I hope so, Angela, because people are losing faith in this bank. And if you don't fix it, the protests are only going to get louder." Angela thanked her for the warning, then hung up, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. That evening, as Angela reviewed more records, she came across something that made her blood run cold. A series of emails between Bradley Owens and a high-ranking executive revealed that the embezzlement scheme wasn't just known to the upper levels of the bank. It had been orchestrated by them. One name stood out: Judith Reynolds. Angela stared at the screen in disbelief. Judith, one of the most vocal critics of the bank's handling of the crisis, was deeply involved in the fraud. A knock at the door startled her. Claudia peeked in, her expression concerned. "Angela, you've been in here all day. Are you okay?" Angela gestured for Claudia to come in and showed her the emails. "Look at this. Judith isn't just complicit. She's one of the ringleaders." Claudia's eyes widened. "This changes everything. What are you going to do?" Angela's jaw tightened. "I'm going to confront her, but not alone. We need to involve legal and ensure we have everything documented." The next morning, Angela called for a private meeting with Richard and the legal team. She laid out the evidence against Judith, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Richard's face darkened as he reviewed the emails. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "Judith has been on the board for years. She's one of the most respected members. Respect won't protect her from the consequences," Angela said firmly. "We need to act before she finds out we know." Later that day, Angela sat in her office, preparing for the confrontation with Judith. But before she could finalize her plans, her phone buzzed with a text from Claudia. "Angela, turn on the news. Now." Angela grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. The headline on the screen made her heart sink. "Whistleblower exposes fraud at Sovereign Bank. Implications for leadership." A reporter was detailing the leaked emails, including Judith's involvement. The whistleblower had gone public, and the story was spreading like wildfire. Angela's phone rang. It was Richard. "Angela," he said, his voice frantic, "Judith just resigned, and she's blaming the fraud on you." Angela froze. The phone pressed to her ear as Richard's words echoed in her mind. "Blaming me?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. "Yes," Richard said grimly. "She's claiming the fraud was part of a scheme you orchestrated to gain control of the bank." Angela's grip tightened on the phone. "That's ridiculous. The evidence points directly to her." "True," Richard agreed, "but Judith is spinning the story. She's saying the emails were doctored and that you're trying to scapegoat her to cover your own tracks." Angela closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. This wasn't just an attack. It was a calculated move to protect herself and take Angela down in the process. "Richard, we can't let this lie gain traction," Angela said firmly. "We need to release the unedited emails and show the truth." "I'll get our legal team on it," Richard replied. "But Angela, be prepared. The media's going to come after you hard." By the time Angela ended the call, her office was already buzzing with activity. Claudia burst in, looking alarmed. "Angela, reporters are gathering outside the building," she said. "They're asking for a statement." Angela nodded, her resolve hardening. "Get me the comms team. We need to get ahead of this." Within an hour, Angela was standing in front of a podium, cameras flashing as she prepared to address the press. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing around her. "I am aware of the accusations made by Judith Reynolds, and I categorically deny them. The evidence we've uncovered clearly implicates Ms. Reynolds and others in a deliberate scheme to defraud this bank and its customers." She held up a folder. "These are the unedited emails, verified by independent experts, that prove Ms. Reynolds' involvement. They will be made available to the public shortly." The reporters erupted with questions, but Angela held up a hand. "I won't be taking questions today. Sovereign Bank is committed to transparency, and we will cooperate fully with investigators to ensure justice is served." As she walked away from the podium, the questions continued to fly, but Angela kept her head high. She wasn't about to let Judith's lies derail her mission. Back in her office, Angela reviewed the updated crisis plan with Claudia and Richard. The legal team had already submitted the emails to federal investigators, and an official statement was being drafted. But Angela knew the fight was far from over. Judith wasn't going to back down easily, and the media frenzy was only growing. "Angela," Claudia said cautiously, "there's something else you should know. I did some digging into Judith's background, and it turns out she has connections to some powerful people in the industry. If she decides to use them, this could get even uglier." Angela nodded, her expression grim. "Let her try. The truth is on our side." The next morning, Angela arrived at the office to find her assistant waiting with a worried expression. Ms. Matthews, there's someone here to see you, the assistant said. He won't leave until he talks to you. Angela frowned. Who is it? He says his name is Jacob Reynolds, the assistant replied. Angela's stomach turned. Jacob Reynolds was Judith's husband and a powerful figure in the banking world. Send him in, Angela said, steeling herself. Jacob entered the office, his towering frame and steely gaze commanding attention. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. You've made a grave mistake, Ms. Matthews, he said coldly. Judith is innocent, and you're dragging her name through the mud. Angela met his gaze evenly. If Judith is innocent, then the evidence will clear her. But so far, everything we've uncovered points to her guilt. Jacob leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. You're playing a dangerous game. Judith has powerful allies, and if you continue down this path, you'll regret it. Angela refused to be intimidated. Mr. Reynolds, I'm not afraid of the truth. If you have evidence that exonerates your wife, I suggest you present it. Otherwise, I'll assume this is just another attempt to deflect blame. Jacob's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. With a final glare, he turned and left the office. As Angela watched him go, Claudia entered, looking shaken. I saw him leave. Are you okay? I'm fine, Angela replied, though her heart was pounding. But this confirms one thing. Judith is desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Later that day, Angela received a call from the federal investigators. Ms. Matthews, the lead investigator, said, We've reviewed the evidence you provided, and it's compelling. But we've also uncovered something you need to see. Can you meet with us tomorrow? Angela's pulse quickened. Of course. I'll be there first thing in the morning. As she hung up, she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. Whatever the investigators had found, it was bound to shake things up even further. Angela sat in the sterile conference room of the federal building, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. Across the table, two federal investigators studied her carefully, their expressions unreadable. Ms. Matthews, the lead investigator, Agent Carter, began, sliding a thick folder toward her. What we're about to show you confirms your suspicions, but it also complicates matters. Angela opened the folder and froze. Inside were documents that not only implicated Judith Reynolds, but also hinted at a much larger network of corruption within Sovereign Bank. Names of executives, branch managers, and even external consultants were listed in connection to the fraudulent schemes. This isn't just one bad apple, Agent Carter continued. It's a systemic issue. Sovereign Bank has been used as a laundering hub for years, and the scale of this operation suggests it reaches beyond your institution. Angela's mind raced. This wasn't just about clearing her name or holding Judith accountable anymore. This was a full-blown crisis that threatened the entire banking sector. Why are you showing me this? Angela asked, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was hearing. Because we need your cooperation, Agent Carter replied. You've already proven to be a key player in exposing this fraud, and as the acting CEO, you have access to information we'll need to take this further. Angela nodded slowly. I'll do whatever it takes to help. But what happens to Sovereign Bank in the meantime? Agent Carter exchanged a glance with his partner before answering. That depends on how quickly we can act. If we can isolate the bad actors and secure the institution, the bank might survive. But if this spirals out of control, Sovereign Bank could collapse. Back at the office, Angela wasted no time rallying her team. She called an emergency meeting with Richard, Claudia, and the legal counsel to brief them on the investigators' findings. This goes deeper than we thought, Angela said, pacing the room. Judith wasn't working alone, and this isn't just about our branch. We're looking at a network of corruption that could bring down the entire bank. Richard's face paled. Do we even have the resources to handle something like this? We don't have a choice, Angela replied. If we don't take control of the narrative and cooperate fully with investigators, Sovereign Bank won't survive the fallout. Claudia spoke up. What about the board? How are they reacting to Judith's resignation? Angela hesitated. Some of them are panicking. Others are trying to distance themselves from the situation. But we can't let internal politics distract us. Our focus has to be on transparency and accountability. As the days passed, Angela worked tirelessly to stabilize the bank. She held town hall meetings with employees, assuring them that the leadership was committed to addressing the crisis. She also met with key clients, promising that their accounts would be protected. But the stress was taking its toll. The media continued to hound her, and rumors about the bank's stability began to spread. Customers started withdrawing their funds, further straining the institution. One evening, as Angela sat in her office reviewing yet another stack of documents, Claudia walked in with a worried expression. "Angela," she said, "we have a problem. A whistleblower from another branch just went public, and they're claiming you were involved in the fraud." Angela's head snapped up. "What?" Claudia handed her a tablet, showing a live news broadcast. The whistleblower, a former branch manager, was tearfully recounting how Angela had allegedly pressured them to falsify accounts. "This is a coordinated attack," Angela said, her voice shaking with anger. "Judith's behind this. She's trying to discredit me to save herself." Claudia nodded. "We need to respond immediately. If this narrative gains traction, it could be the final nail in the coffin." The next morning, Angela held another press conference, this time with Richard and the legal team by her side. "I want to address the accusations made against me," Angela began, her tone calm but firm. "They are completely false and part of a larger effort to undermine the investigation into Sovereign Bank's corruption. We have evidence that will not only clear my name, but also expose those who are truly responsible." She gestured to Richard, who stepped forward with a USB drive. "This contains documentation that disproves the whistleblower's claims and reveals the extent of the fraud perpetrated by Judith Reynolds and her associates. We are releasing this information to the public today." The room erupted with questions, but Angela maintained her composure. "This is about more than just one person or one bank. It's about holding those in power accountable and ensuring that justice is served." Later that evening, as Angela was leaving the office, she received a call from Agent Carter. "Angela, we've made a breakthrough," he said. "One of the suspects we brought in just flipped. They're willing to testify against Judith and the others in exchange for leniency." Angela's heart raced. "What did they say?" "They confirmed that Judith was one of the masterminds," Carter replied. "But there's more. They also mentioned a hidden account tied to Judith, a slush fund she used to bribe other executives." Angela's breath caught. "Do you know where the account is?" "We're tracking it down," Carter said. "But if we find it, it'll be the smoking gun we need to take her down." Angela felt a surge of hope for the first time in days. But as she hung up, she couldn't shake the feeling that Judith wasn't done yet. The next morning, Angela arrived at the office to find a package waiting on her desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a chilling message. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Angela stared at the note, her hands trembling. Judith was playing dirty, and the stakes had just been raised. Angela stared at the note, her breath shallow as a cold chill ran down her spine. The message wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. She immediately called security, instructing them to sweep the office for any potential breaches. "Who could have left this here?" Claudia asked, her voice low as she examined the ominous note. "Judith," Angela replied, her tone sharp. "She's trying to scare me into backing off." Claudia nodded. "Or someone working for her. We need to be careful, Angela. If they're willing to leave threats, who knows what they'll do next?" Angela took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. "We don't have time to be scared. We need to stay ahead of her." Later that day, Angela met with Richard and the legal team to strategize. The investigators had tracked down the slush fund Judith was using, and the evidence was damning. The account showed multiple large payments to various individuals within the bank, including the whistleblower who had accused Angela. "This is the leverage we've been waiting for," Richard said, his voice filled with determination. "If we release this, Judith's entire house of cards will come crashing down." Angela hesitated. "We need to be strategic. If we act too soon, she could find a way to spin this. Let's make sure the investigators are ready to move before we go public." Richard agreed, and the team set to work, gathering additional evidence to build an airtight case. That evening, Angela returned home exhausted but resolute. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat down at her dining table, her mind racing with everything that had happened. Just as she began to relax, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You've been warned. Walk away while you still can. Angela's heart pounded as she stared at the screen. She refused to let fear consume her, but the threats were becoming increasingly bold. She quickly forwarded the message to Agent Carter, who called her within minutes. Angela, this is escalating, Carter said, his voice serious. We'll increase your security detail, but you need to be vigilant. Judith and her associates are desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. I won't back down, Angela replied firmly. If anything, this makes me more determined to see this through. The next day at the office, Angela was met with a surprise. The bank's board of directors had called an emergency meeting, and the mood was tense as she entered the conference room. Angela, one of the board members began, we've been following the developments closely, and while we commend your efforts to expose the fraud, we're concerned about the bank's reputation. Customers are pulling their accounts, and our stock prices are plummeting. Angela stood her ground. I understand your concerns, but this isn't the time to prioritize appearances over accountability. If we let this corruption go unchecked, Sovereign Bank will never recover. Another board member frowned. But the media is painting you as part of the problem. How do you expect us to support you when your name is being dragged through the mud? Angela's jaw tightened. I've already provided evidence to clear my name, and more is on the way. But I need the board's backing to see this through. Without your support, this bank will crumble under the weight of its own corruption. The room fell silent as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, the chairman spoke. We'll stand by you for now, he said. But if this situation doesn't improve soon, we may have to reconsider. As Angela left the meeting, she felt a mix of frustration and determination. She knew the board's support was fragile, but she couldn't let that deter her. Later that evening, she received another call from Agent Carter. We've traced the slush fund to an offshore account, Carter said. Judith used a series of shell companies to hide the transactions, but we've managed to follow the trail. It's solid evidence. Angela felt a surge of relief. That's great news. What's the next step? We're preparing to issue warrants for her arrest and the others involved, Carter replied. But Angela, you need to be careful. Judith knows we're closing in, and she won't go down without a fight. The next morning, Angela arrived at the office to find chaos. The media was camped outside. Employees were whispering anxiously in the halls, and Richard was waiting for her with a grim expression. Angela, we have a major problem, he said. Judith just released a statement accusing you of orchestrating the entire scheme. She's claiming you framed her to cover your tracks. Angela's stomach dropped. What? How could she even? She's backed it up with forged documents, Richard said, handing her a folder. They're fake, but convincing enough to sow doubt. Angela scanned the papers, her blood boiling. Judith was pulling out all the stops to save herself, and the public was eating it up. We need to respond immediately, Angela said, her voice firm. Call a press conference. If Judith wants a fight, she'll get one. As Angela prepared to face the media, her phone buzzed again. It was another text from the unknown number. This is your last warning. Drop it now, or you'll regret it. Angela's resolve hardened. Whoever was behind the threats underestimated her. She wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. Stepping out to the podium, Angela took a deep breath. The cameras flashed as she began to speak. Good afternoon. I'm here to address the baseless accusations made against me by Judith Reynolds. The documents she presented are forgeries, and I have the evidence to prove it. Furthermore, I have uncovered new information that will expose the full extent of her involvement in the fraud at Sovereign Bank. The room erupted with questions, but Angela wasn't finished. To those who think they can intimidate me into silence, know this. I will not be threatened, and I will not stop until the truth is revealed. As she stepped down from the podium, Angela felt a surge of determination. The battle was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. The tension in the air was palpable as Angela returned to her office. The press conference had bought her some time, but she knew the storm wasn't over. The media buzzed with reactions, some supportive, others skeptical. Angela didn't care. Her focus was on exposing Judith and ensuring Sovereign Bank's survival. As she settled behind her desk, Richard burst into the room, his face pale and alarmed. Angela, he said, shutting the door quickly. Judith's not done. She's escalated. Angela frowned. What now? She's filed a lawsuit against you, Richard said, dropping a thick stack of legal documents onto her desk. Defamation, fraud, and obstruction of justice. She's claiming damages in the millions. Angela stared at the papers, a wave of anger washing over her. This is a distraction tactic, she said, her voice steady despite the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She wants to tie us up in legal battles while she makes her escape. Richard nodded. It's more than that. She's trying to create a smokescreen. If we don't counter this quickly, it could undermine everything we've worked for. Meanwhile, Agent Carter was making progress on the investigation. Late that evening, Angela received a call from him. We've traced the offshore account to its origin, Carter said. Judith was using it to funnel money to high-ranking officials and executives, including members of your board. We've secured warrants, and we're preparing for a series of raids. Angela felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Does this mean we'll finally have enough to take her down? It's a strong case, Carter replied. But Judith's resources run deep. We need to move quickly before she disappears. Angela agreed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Judith still had one final card to play. The following morning, Angela arrived at the office to find the mood even more tense than before. Employees whispered in hushed tones, and security guards patrolled the hallways. Claudia rushed into Angela's office, her face etched with worry. Angela, you need to see this, Claudia said, turning on the television. On the screen, a breaking news banner flashed as a reporter stood outside Judith's lavish estate. Moments ago, federal agents executed a raid on the home of former Sovereign Bank executive Judith Reynolds, the reporter said. Authorities have seized documents and electronic devices believed to contain evidence of widespread fraud. However, Judith Reynolds was not found at the property and is currently considered a fugitive. Angela leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. Judith was on the run, and the stakes had just been raised even higher. She's not going to go quietly, Angela said. We need to be ready for anything. As Angela worked with her team to navigate the fallout, she received another message from the unknown number. You think you've won? This isn't over. Angela's hands tightened around her phone. Judith's reach was unsettling, but Angela refused to let fear dictate her actions. Later that afternoon, Agent Carter called with an update. We've frozen Judith's accounts and issued a warrant for her arrest, Carter said. But she's already transferred a significant amount of money to another offshore account. We believe she's trying to leave the country. Angela's mind raced. Can you stop her? We're coordinating with international authorities, Carter replied. But she's resourceful. If she gets out of the country, it'll be much harder to bring her back. As evening fell, Angela was reviewing the bank's financial reports when her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video message. Angela hesitated before opening it. The screen flickered to life, and there was Judith, seated in a dimly lit room. Hello, Angela, Judith said, her tone icy. You've made this personal, and that was your mistake. You think you've won, but you don't realize the web you're caught in. This goes beyond Sovereign Bank. You've stepped into something much bigger than you can handle. The video ended abruptly, leaving Angela with a sinking feeling. Judith wasn't just a rogue executive. She was part of something far more dangerous. The next day, Angela was summoned to the federal building for a high-level meeting. Agent Carter and his team presented the evidence they had gathered, including the video Judith had sent. This confirms our suspicions, Carter said. Judith isn't just running a fraud scheme. She's connected to a larger criminal network. If we take her down, we could expose operations that span multiple industries and countries. Angela felt the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. This was no longer just about Sovereign Bank or her personal fight for justice. This was about dismantling a global web of corruption. What do you need from me? Angela asked. Your cooperation, Carter replied, and your courage. This isn't going to be easy, but together, we can bring them all down. Angela nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. She was ready to face whatever came next, no matter how dangerous it might be. Angela walked out of the federal building, her mind racing. Judith's cryptic video had revealed more than Angela had anticipated. It wasn't just Sovereign Bank at stake. This was an operation with tendrils reaching into powerful, untouchable places. The weight of it all pressed on her chest, but Angela was never one to back down. Her phone buzzed with another message. This time, it wasn't anonymous. Meet me at the Four Seasons penthouse. Come alone. The sender? Judith Reynolds. Angela stared at the screen, her instinct screaming to involve Agent Carter. But something about the message felt urgent, like a crack in Judith's usually impenetrable facade. Angela decided to go, but on her terms. She texted Carter, sharing her location and Judith's message, then arranged for plainclothes agents to shadow her from a distance. The Four Seasons was eerily quiet when Angela arrived. The doorman greeted her but didn't question her as she stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. The ride felt eternal, each ding echoing ominously in her ears. The elevator doors slid open to reveal Judith sitting in an opulent living room, a glass of wine in her hand. Despite her calm exterior, her eyes betrayed a storm. "Angela," Judith said with a forced smile. "Always so bold. What do you want, Judith?" Angela asked, her tone sharp. Judith gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit. Let's talk." Angela hesitated, but took the seat, her gaze never leaving Judith's. "You've been quite the thorn in my side," Judith began, swirling her wine. "But I admire your tenacity. Most people would have folded by now." Angela leaned forward. "You didn't bring me here to compliment me. What do you want?" Judith's smile faded. "A deal. You back off, drop everything, and I'll disappear. You'll get your precious bank back, your reputation restored, and you won't have to worry about what's coming." Angela scoffed. "What's coming? More threats?" "You're out of moves, Judith. The authorities are closing in, and I have every intention of seeing this through." Judith's eyes darkened. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't just about me. The people I work with, they don't play games. If you keep pushing, you'll lose more than your career. You'll lose everything." Angela's stomach tightened, but she refused to show fear. "Let me make something clear. I'm not backing down. If you think you can scare me into silence, you don't know me at all." Judith sighed, setting her glass down. "I was afraid you'd say that. It's a shame, really. I had hoped we could avoid the ugliness." Before Angela could respond, the door burst open, and two men stormed in, their faces obscured by masks. "Take her," one of them ordered, and they lunged for Angela. Angela's instincts kicked in, and she grabbed the wine bottle from the table, swinging it at one of the men. The bottle shattered, and the man stumbled back, clutching his face. The other man grabbed her arm, but Angela twisted free and ran toward the balcony, her heart pounding. Outside, the city lights stretched endlessly, but there was no escape. The balcony's edge loomed, and the men closed in. Just as one of them lunged, the sound of a door crashing open echoed behind them. "FBI, don't move." Agent Carter and his team stormed in, guns drawn. The masked men froze, their hands in the air, as agents restrained them. Judith stood calmly amidst the chaos, her expression unreadable. As agents handcuffed her, she turned to Angela. "This isn't over," Judith said, her voice low. "You've won the battle, but the war is just beginning." Angela watched as Judith was led away, her heart still racing. She had survived the night, but Judith's warning echoed in her mind. Back at the federal building, Angela sat across from Carter in a dimly lit interrogation room. "That was reckless," Carter said, his tone firm. "You could have been killed." "I couldn't ignore her," Angela replied. "She knows more than she's letting on. She's not the top of this operation. Someone else is pulling the strings." Carter nodded. "We're starting to see that. The accounts Judith managed are connected to a larger network, but we need more to take them down." Angela leaned forward. "Then let's find it. I'm not stopping until every single one of them is exposed." The next day, Sovereign Bank issued a statement acknowledging the fraud scandal and pledging full cooperation with federal authorities. Angela stood in her office, watching the announcement on the news. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Judith was just the beginning. You have no idea what you're up against." Angela stared at the message, her resolve hardening. She had stepped into a world of danger and deceit, but she wasn't alone. With Carter and her team by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The media frenzy surrounding Judith's arrest reached a fever pitch, but Angela barely had time to notice. Sovereign Bank was in damage control, federal agents were unraveling an intricate web of corruption, and Angela's personal resolve was being tested like never before. But Angela had one goal: to end this. For good. The morning after Judith's cryptic message, Angela sat in a federal briefing room with Agent Carter and his team. The evidence from Judith's seized documents had led them to a shadowy organization that extended far beyond the bank. Offshore accounts, bribery schemes, and powerful figures in politics and business, all were entangled in the conspiracy. Judith wasn't bluffing, Carter admitted grimly. We've uncovered connections to individuals who have the means to bury this investigation, or worse, bury us. Angela sat straight, her voice steady. Then we need to move fast. If we hesitate, they'll destroy the evidence, and we'll lose any chance of holding them accountable. Carter nodded. We've secured warrants for key players. Raids are being coordinated as we speak. But Angela, you need to be careful. These people won't just fight back. They'll retaliate. Angela met his gaze, unflinching. Let them come. I'm not afraid. Hours later, Angela was back at the Sovereign Bank headquarters when the next blow landed. A massive cyber attack struck the bank servers, shutting down operations and threatening to erase critical data. Angela, it's a full-scale breach. Richard burst into her office, panic in his eyes. They're targeting the files linked to the investigation. Angela sprang into action, rallying the IT team to secure backups and block the attack. She called Carter, who dispatched cybercrime experts to assist. For hours, the team worked tirelessly, sweat beading on their brows as they raced to outmaneuver the hackers. Finally, just as it seemed the breach would overwhelm them, the system locked out the intruders. Angela slumped into her chair, exhausted but triumphant. They're desperate, she said to Richard. And that means we're close to something big. The next day, a new lead emerged. One of Judith's accomplices, caught during the raids, agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. His testimony revealed a critical meeting between the organization's top players happening that night at a secluded private estate. Angela insisted on being involved in the operation. Carter initially resisted but eventually relented, knowing Angela's determination wouldn't waver. That evening, Angela found herself in an unmarked van with Carter and his team, watching the estate from a distance. Inside, powerful men and women, bankers, politicians, and CEOs, were gathered to discuss their next moves. They won't see this coming, Carter said as the team prepared to move in. Angela nodded, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment to end the corruption that had tainted Sovereign Bank and so many others. The raid was swift and precise. Agents stormed the estate, catching the conspirators off guard. Chaos erupted as high-profile figures were arrested, their attempts to flee thwarted by the agents surrounding the property. Angela stood outside, watching as the people who had operated above the law were led away in handcuffs. Among them was Judith, her calm composure shattered. She glared at Angela as she was escorted to a waiting vehicle. You think this is over? Judith spat. You're a fool. There's always someone else. Someone bigger. Angela stepped closer, meeting Judith's venomous gaze. Let them come. I'll fight them too. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was monumental. Headlines blared the news of the arrests, and Angela became a symbol of integrity and resilience. Sovereign Bank underwent a complete overhaul, with Angela leading the charge to rebuild trust and ensure transparency. Agent Carter visited Angela one final time, this time as a friend rather than a partner in the fight. You've done something incredible, Angela, he said. You didn't just save your bank. You helped expose a system of corruption that's been operating in the shadows for years. Angela smiled, though the weight of the journey still lingered. I just did what had to be done. As Carter left, Angela sat in her office, looking out at the city skyline. She thought of the challenges she had faced, the people she had fought for, and the battles still ahead. But for the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. The storm was over, and Angela knew, no matter what came next, she was ready. This concludes the story of a white bank manager who rejects black woman check, then learns she's his boss. Feel free to share your thoughts and opinions about this shocking story in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to get notified whenever there's a new video. It will help us bring you more impactful content. See you in the next video.